have an art form that is being, that is now at risk and susceptible to the economic downturn of people not able to make a livelihood, no? Or what is it that Dr. Frank put it, telecommuting unfriendly lifestyles, right? So for NALAC, which is the National Association of Latino Arts and Cultures, and arts organizations that also have a national scope and state scope as well. You see these different organizations putting out a lot of surveys, trying to gather information about what the needs are of Latinx art makers right now. And they came up with an emergency grant called Actos de Confianza. And I put the website there. Their Actos de Confianza grant is currently closed, but they have different grant opportunities throughout the year. And that's just an organization to keep in mind that is having a response to the COVID virus. Okay. Popular Latinx and Latin American musicians. And I say popular because they have a large audience and they have the ability to live off of their savings. They continue to make money from their music or from their art form, even when they're not taking gigs and touring actively. So just a cross section, it just seems like just about anybody who has a platform and who has a high impact in popular culture on the hemispheric level, you can pretty much count on them to be dedicating some of their celebrity to one or more causes, for relief workers, for first responders, or for communities that are just facing economic devastation. So just a quick cross section here. Prince Royce, and he's Dominican American. He has a face mask line, popular. So we gotta have style, right? Face the pandemic with style. So his alter ego album, he's got face mask themes, drawing on the imagery from his alter ego album to support families in need in the Bronx. And he is also working with Niños let me see, let me change my view. Okay, Niño de la Caridad Foundation. We have Gloria Trevi in Mexico, and her foundation is Ana Dalai, has teamed up with brand Bella All Natural to help the frontline heroes during the global pandemic. Cani Garcia in Puerto Rico, she teamed up with True Self Foundation that provides services to the LGBTQ community in Puerto Rico and helps to bring visibility and dialogue to the fact that trans and LGBTQ peoples hit by the coronavirus are also facing the additional, the additional issues of discrimination when they try to re-enter the workforce. Nati Natasha, Dominican Republic, she's teamed up with Major League Hall of Famer Pedro Martinez and the Pedro Martinez Foundation to deliver food to struggling families in the Dominican Republic. And Ricky Martin, Puerto Rico, he launched a new campaign, #HelpFromHome, to help healthcare workers to save lives through the nonprofit Project Hope. So I guess a first response through arts organizations and through these major Latino celebrities on the hemispheric level is to figure out where they can use celebrity, where they can use funds to address the communities that are most in need. Okay. Bien. Culture work also has its first responders. Musicians, comics, and performance artists have all been responding through the artwork that they make. One example is Bad Bunny, the popular Puerto Rican artist. He released a song and a video called En Casita that deals with the experience of being at home. Let's see if I can play a little bit.
Yo que te quería, pero no se va a poder. Toca quedarme en casa, toca quedarme en casa. Yo que te quería ver, pero no se va a poder. Toca quedarme en casa, toca quedarme en casa. El sol ya se escondió, que el día nunca empezó. Solo me ve, ya Wanda me testió, pa' casa me metió. Ahora despierto hasta las 6, todo el día jugando play. Se acabó la leche, después que yo eché el conflay. No quiero morir, tampoco romper la ley, pero estar metido aquí hasta mayo 16. Está cabrón. Ey, está cabrón, soy yo. En la fila un viejito se desmayó. Quiero que el virus se vaya como lo sé yo.
Okay, I'm trying to stop this song and I'm not succeeding. Okay, very catchy. Yeah, see, Bad Bunny, once you get started with Bad Bunny, it just doesn't leave you. Okay, you're welcome. You're welcome for that. Okay, hang on. Am I still with you? Let me resume my share for a quick second. Ignore this. Start share, resume share. Okay, here we go. There's Bad Bunny. Enter full screen. We good? Yeah, okay, all right, comics. Lalo Alcaraz. So I just have to say, Bad Bunny, you see him like doing his home style, right? His Crocs and his, surfer jams at home with the Clorox wipes and everything like that. Just bringing it home that we're all celebrities, no matter who you are, people's experiences, there's something that's resonating that we all have in common, which is the experience of just social distancing or being in quarantine. And that was one of the ways that he, wanted to reach out to his community. Comics, Lalo Alcaraz, one of the most important Chicano cartoonists and political cartoonists of our time. One of his responses is to create, there's this single panel cartoon that he did. And I love his political cartoons. You see the little signs, for example, I demand my freedom. Just the way that people were trying to, the way that you saw protesters trying to get out of the house, trying to end the restrictions, going to the beach, right? Let me see. My cats want me out is another sign. I am exactly like Rosa Parks. So the idea that the people who were on the front line trying to end the restrictions that were put in place to protect public health, that the kind of people that were attending those types of protests were extremely conservative to reactionary. And it's showing like I think the absurdity of some of their claims about what quarantine and what the slowdown of the economy was doing to them personally. It says, look at me, I need my hairstylist. So, like this is their political urgency, right? Okay, now another approach, not single panel political cartoons, but another style is to look at comics, superhero comics. And Hector Rodriguez, he has Latino first responders as the people who work in the fields. Crop workers are essential workers. And so he has a comic series that is showing how much they are like our superheroes, that they're essential workers. And it has a nurse commenting on how they are the real American heroes. So we've had these hola y adios immigration policies with Latino immigrants, with Latin American immigrants. And so this is trying to foreground how badly they need it, but also how badly they need protections that right now are not being extended to them for the reasons that my fellow panelists have commented on already. Performance artists. I wanted to let you know that there's 2 performance artists with whom OSU Latinx faculty has relationships. So Guillermo Gomez Peña and La Pocha Nostra, they have a How to Survive the Apocalypse, evening of body-based performances and strategies to cruise, crash, cross the virtual border of boredom. And that's going to be this Friday. Our graduate student who just recently received an MFA in dance is now a core member of the Pocha Nostra performance troupe. So you can check that out this Friday. Also, Awilda Rodriguez Lora, she is a resident artist. This fall, she's going to be virtually working with the Latinx faculty and the arts programming at the Wexner OSU. And she also has, she had an event on the 14th of June, Hablemos de Negritud, and that was a Zoom project. Finally, going back to our Hijo del Soberano, right? Culture means a lot of things. Culture can mean just the fact that Latinos hug and kiss when they greet. The way we open social space is we rely on physical contact, right? And that is something that we are trying to negotiate actively. What happens when I can't say hello the way I need to say hello? What happens when I don't have those kisses and that the cariño that keeps me going, right? And I want to offer that we're going to keep coming up with our own ways to cope with distance. The way that Hijo de Soberano, you know, made a lucha themed mask that even through this distancing and even through masking, the Latinx communities are going to continue to find ways for their culture to be front and center, and for that culture to be part of their resilience during these trying times. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much. Michael, do you want to take the questions and moderate? As the youngest of, you are muted.
Sure.
All the panelists, perhaps you are the best at, you know, going windows and reading chats, so.
Yes, definitely. So for those attendees right now, a couple of points. The first point is I recorded halfway through our presentation, and so I am going to ask that those first presenters, those first panelists, send me whatever information that we can provide for those attendees or future viewers who want that information. I can go ahead and put that also on the website. That is my mistake, my bad, sorry. But also beyond that, for those current attendees, there's a Q&A button there at the bottom of our presentation screen. If you want to ask questions, feel free to press that Q&A button and ask your questions there. But to begin the moderated discussion portion, we do have our first question. And I'm reading this straight from the Q&A. Can you give an example, and I'm opening this up to the panelists, of informal cultural brokering?
I think Glenn mentioned that. Glenn, I'm volunteering you.
Okay.
Voluntold.
Yeah, so informal cultural brokering is basically, you know, it's a cultural practice. It's what happens when you know, a child goes to an adult child goes to the doctor with their parents, you know, for instance, and begins to interact and provide information, you know, to the patient through the provider. So, you know, it can be just straight language translation, but it can also be taking a message and repurposing that message in a way that a person can use it. And it happens in multiple ways. You know, typically we know that, you know, going to the doctor is kind of a family affair entre los Latinos, right? So, you know, that's kind of the mechanism or the dynamics going on there, sort of, is what we refer to as cultural brokering. And those informal channels are kind of lost in this, you know, you know, pandemic. The loss of you know, face-to-face interaction with healthcare providers, moving towards telehealth, and you know, restrictions on visitors and so forth. So those are kind of the threats to that informal cultural brokering.
Wonderful, thank you. We have a follow-up question, or a second question. It feels like we are all changed by the events of the spring and now summer. Will the events of this year, some of the things you talked about here, be reflected in your classes or research planned for the autumn? Great question.
Yeah.
I would just say absolutely. There's nothing that isn't going to be touched by these events. As somebody who works with culture, that is what is happening currently in our culture. That this is going to radically shift what my students' needs are, how I deliver, what my pedagogies are, right? Because I was somebody who just kind of relied a lot on performance techniques in the classroom and touching and, dancing or things like that, right? So that's going to be a big whoa. But also some of the matters that I was, sharing with you, like essential workers, the discourses around essential workers. What are the political cartoons? What are the performance artists doing? So these cultural first responders are going to definitely be at the forefront of how I'm shaping my pedagogy moving into the coming year. Most definitely.
I have a personal question for Dr. Frank. So you mentioned in your mini lecture that COVID-19 is really kind of revealing through your LEAF example the inequalities and inequities in our social condition and our social safety nets. For those viewers who are watching currently or those future viewers, what would you recommend should they want to act on this? What is it that we as everyday average citizens, Ohio State students, staff, and faculty to combat or counter this?
That's a great question. And I think the sky's the limit. I mean, there's a lot that needs to get changed. So these are large population health researchers look at health. I mean, I remember I just read recently that all policy is health policy, right? I mean, health frequently reveals these underlying large structural or forces that pattern our society and pattern how some groups fare in our society. And health is one of those kind of mirrors that we can reflect back how society is working or not. So, I mean, that was one of Elizabeth Warren's political buttons. I remember is big structural change. So it was deemed maybe a turnoff to a lot of the ways that Americans think about action and what kind of individual actions. And that's tricky. I mean, I think that as individuals, of course, we have a role to play. On the other hand, there are large structural changes that have to happen so that certain communities are not at higher risk for whatever, and for COVID, for poor outcomes with COVID, for precarious employment, for all of those other things that we, for our lack of a safety net in this country. And I do think the thing that's kind of, that's from a scientific vantage point is fascinating about COVID is that it's global. It's happening everywhere, right? And so it really, by comparing at a nation state level, how different countries are faring and what, can be very revealing about what are some of the things for countries that are not doing so well, our own right now. What is it that we do differently that is contributing to the fact that we have the highest case counts and highest death rates? We could start with healthcare. For sure, we can talk to employment being linked to healthcare. We can talk about for-profit healthcare, but I think we can also go deeper, and we can talk about again things that have to do big questions about the labor force and safety net and our social institutions. I mean, this should be a big conversation.
It sounds like a big conversation. These are all very structural, systemic issues facing the country and people, and it sounds like to me that a simple disregarding of cultural norms and practices of hugging and kissing might not be the end all, the solution to this problem.
Right.
Just to add really quickly to Rianne's answer, I think we haven't talked yet about the protest and the Black Lives Matters movement, but I think that there are quite a few connections to be made in terms of the environmental inequalities and health inequalities that we've been talking about, and the overall structural conditions that motivate, in addition to the proximate event of the killing of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, as well as too many others, that connect to questions of, for instance, the fact that mental health is a problem that is addressed by police, right? And much of the defunding the police proposals have to do with getting the police out of where it shouldn't be, such as, you know, domestic altercations or mental health, I think, figuring prominently among those. And I think that OSU has responded to both the question of racial injustice and COVID-19 by offering, in addition to other things, by offering research funds to have these questions be discussed and researched formally by faculty. So I think the students that are coming in this fall will see kind of those funds in action. I mean, I think that more is needed, and, you know, more discussion and sustained discussion is needed. But I think incoming students will see how this is going to be our everyday conversation, I hope.
So I'll open up more questions to any current attendees. I also have a quick question for Dr. Martinez Cruz, Paloma. So I actually recently read somewhere or heard somewhere that artists create art to imagine a world that could be. And I thought of that quote when you displayed some of the political cartoons and comics. What do you envision as the future of art as COVID-19 continues to plague the country with regard to the Latinx community and Latinx artists?
Unmute. I imagine us coming together to unmute.
Yes.
Well, right. Like, that could work, right? Like, let's be synchronous. Let's unmute. Really, there's no part of the artistic imagination that is not being impacted in really fundamental ways by what's going on, right? It's more than just economic, like, oh, I can't gig now and that's how I make my money, right? And it's the imagination itself has to be fired up to conceive of ways of us coming together that transcend Zoom exhaustion, right? That I could just, you know, can I get a witness, right? There's the ways that we want to come together, and we must do so with the resources that we have at our disposal, but also knowing that that's not quite enough, right? So I think that this is just a time of like radical reinvention, and the solutions and the ways that people think about making are definitely, I think, you know, technology is part of that first wave of, you know, just like to keep making material, to keep sharing material. But I think different ways of coming together, different ways of having access to arts as a public, right? I think those are being challenged and re-envisioned right now in some powerful ways. So I don't have anything like a concrete, it's a this. But I think, you know, the protests themselves are a powerful example of how you can't stop cultural responses. If you look at the ways that Columbus statues, right, give it up to the, you know, exciting name of our city. If you think about the ways that they're defaced, that's a way that you can't hold back public art, right? The masks themselves. So you see culture streaming out of people as this this way that you just feel social transformation needs to be inevitable in the hands of artivists, of art makers who are, you know, activists, right? So you just see that spilling out into the streets. So there's no way to hold it back, but the ways that it becomes delivered are going to be in a really crazy state of flux right now for the artists that are telecommuter unfriendly. Yeah. So I clearly wrote a note there. Thanks, Dr. Frank.
I really like that.
Kind of a way to talk about, you know, certain kinds of art making.
I really like that explanation, this idea of art like flowing into the streets, into the public space, into the public sphere. I really like that analogy, that vision, that imagination. Yeah, it's
not waiting for a museum to give it permission. It's not waiting for an art opening. It's not waiting for, you know, the wine and cheese reception. It's there. And if you look at that, those are sculptures that are that we're going to remember. Our nation is going to remember. Those are going to make history as cultural responses.
Thank you for that. Thank you. We do have a question for you as well. Following up to that, given that so many performance artists are now using Zoom to extend the work that they typically do face-to-face, do you think this will permanently change how we understand community building, space, and performance? A permanent change.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, it will be another change. I hope that art is always looking like it's like the glass of water I'm sipping from, right? If we think about culture as the water, it's always looking for the most appropriate container, right? It's always going to be flowing and changing. It's malleable. So I don't want us to think about the changes that we're seeing as destination points, but rather as further evidence of art and culture's fluidity. There are going to be some changes that make a lot of sense for the ways that we need to shift. And I'm very hopeful that under the COVID regime, we can also be rethinking what can we apply towards environmental stewardship about our circumstances right now. What can we apply? What's useful here? What can we parlay into just being better environmental stewards about what's going, into be better, stewards of the, of our society and the way that historical oppression is racialized, So I guess what are the frutos of this terrible moment that we're going to be drawing on for a long time? So not change as one destination. There's no one structure that should be like a final resting point or should be what we're trying to make a final resting point, but just a lot to learn, a lot to learn as we continue to flow.
We do have one final question, and then I'm going to open up after this question to panelists for any last minute remarks, and then we can close today's webinar. This last question, what about DACA? If the courts rule against it, will the response from advocates be drowned out by COVID-19 and BLM? Or is there room in the movement to include support for the undocumented?
If I can speak briefly to that. So, I mean, the first thing I would say is that there is more overlap between the Black Lives Matter movement and immigration than kind of superficially we could think about. I mean, the dominant way of detection and then deportation for migrants is contact with police. And contact with police depends on usually racial profiling of Latinx and Black people predominantly. There is, of course, Afro-Latinx community that is impacted differently than brown Latinos, to put it that way. So the first thing I would say is that there are these, very clearly overlapping forms in which the state, the structure that we were talking about, affects both Latinos and Black groups in the United States. And we shall see. Whether how these movements are going to converge. I know that there are ongoing conversations about the ways in which Latinx movements can and do support and enter in coalition and have been entering in coalition with Black Lives Matter movements. So I think that there is definitely space in the sense that we are talking about structural systemic racism that affects both Black and brown people. And second, I hope that there is space as well because these conversations are already happening.
Thank you.
That comes also to my closing remarks. So thank you everyone for coming.
Any other final remarks? Dr. Martinez-Cruz, Dr. Martinez, Dr. Frank?
Thank you for the opportunity.
Perfect, thank you, thank you. In closing, thank you to our moderator, Dr. Valdez, our panelists, Dr. Martinez-Cruz, Dr. Martinez, and Dr. Frank, our attendees and our future viewers for joining us today. We do have further summer webinars. July 1st, we'll have our next one, and so please join us for that. And should you have any future questions, comments, or concerns, please do not hesitate to contact me directly or any of our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.